Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm Louis-Richard Tremblay from Montreal. Hi to Deborah, way back. So I'm a producer at the National Film Board of Canada. So for those of you who don't know the National Film Board, we've been producing film since 1939. And 70 years after that, mainly animation and documentary film, we've opened up studios in Vancouver and in Montreal in 2008 and 2009. What we do mainly is really interactive, and more we're looking to inspiration in every other field of media, and we are more and more, of course, looking into the gaming realm of film. So today I've decided to invite on the panel to talk about the collisions that sometimes happen when you go together producing a game when you're not from the gaming realm. Just so I get a general feeling of who we are talking to. Who's from the gaming universe here? Okay. Who's from the film or moving image? And who's not? Okay, thank you. So let me introduce you to Vali Fugulin. She's a resident at our studio in Montreal. So the residency program is 2 years where we invite an author to develop a project from ground to broadcasting. There's Ruben Farrus from Minority, well known for Spirits of Spring, that was just released not so long ago, and Philip Tan from MIT, head of the game lab at MIT. So maybe you can, So the game those two guys worked on is called I Love Potatoes, and I let them introduce themselves.
Is this on? Okay, yes, thank you. Hi. So my name is Vali, and I'm working right now on a game called I Love Potatoes with Ruben. The game is being completed right now, and it will be out in September. Usually I don't make games, I make films. I've made films for the last 15 years, but in the last 5 years, when people ask me at parties, what do I do? There's a big long stare, and I don't know what to say, because now I tell stories that are documentary based, but it could be linear, non-linear, interactive, and now games. So I came to the National Film Board with a project on social innovation. Do people know what social innovation is? No. Okay. Social innovation is a term to say when people solve social problems with creative ideas. You've heard of microcredit, Mohamed Yunus. You've heard of some initiatives to recycle garbage and give employment to people who do that. That's all examples of social innovation. So as a documentary filmmaker, I've met some of those people in the real world, and I wanted to make a web documentary on these people, and I wanted it for kids. So I thought, I'll make a web doc with a game interface so I can interest kids into these issues and to these great people. So I arrived at the National Film Board with a web doc project, and then we ended up with a full-on 3D game that we're working on. So something happened. What happened is that we evolved thinking around the interface, and we thought, well, maybe this is a full-on game. And today is about how do we meet, how do two people who come from really different backgrounds meet and create in a new media. So that's it.
Yeah, so just to give you a little context, so when she arrived at our studio, it wasn't planned to be a game necessarily, but it's really, like she just said, working with it, and at a certain point, that's where we're always looking at our studios, like where is interactivity connecting to the storytelling and the subject of the document we want to produce, and this is where we met those guys from Minority.
So my name is Ruben, and I'm a creative director at Minority. I was a game designer on a game called Papo and Yo that was released a few years ago, and then I went to be a creative director on Spirits of Spring. And then I met these guys with this crazy idea of making a doku game, and I found it very interesting because one of my motivations as a game designer is to find ways to make games about the human experience, which I feel is something that we don't do enough in the game industry. My background is in the commercial game industry. I worked in big games and indie games, and always with a focus on like creating a product that's going to reach as many people as possible. So when I saw this project, I saw an opportunity to do something different, something that we could reach a lot of people.
Thanks. And one other thing is, like at the studio, what we like to do is mix people. And when we mix people, we need usually help and to be very sensible to the surroundings of those mix and match people coming from different backgrounds, different disciplines, in the hope of creating creative collisions. And often we have worked with those guys at the MIT Game Lab. So maybe Philip.
So my name is Philip Tan. I work at MIT Game Lab, which is a research lab at MIT that studies games and play. One thing that we're often called on with groups like the NFB, also groups in MIT, is how do we translate their ideas into some form of play, whether that's digital or tabletop or live action. And so one thing that we often try to do is engage in a sort of educational process where we work together in a workshop format or on a longer term project to help people understand where they're coming from, what are the ideas they're bringing to the table, and how do we make the most out of the media, which might or might not be a game, but is more than often than not something playful.
Thank you. So we'll go right into it. It's really about a conversation between two creators that we wanted to bring to you, and Philip will try to contextualize it going on. So just the first question, what are the challenges working together?
Well, the first challenge perhaps was the first question we asked ourselves, because I wanted to make a docu-game, and then Ruben was like, what the hell is a docu-game? Or almost, no. But I mean, we had to discuss a lot at the beginning of what was a documentary and what was a game. And for this, Ruben gave us an interesting exercise. We made a lexicon of the terms we kept using, but we weren't sure if we were using them in the same way. One example would be that I would talk about reality, and we defined what reality is. And to me, reality was real people on the field that you could film. And then Ruben would say, well, reality in games could be something that seems like reality, but it's not really reality. So terms like learning, audience, I mean, we use the same terms, but we really don't use them in the same way. So we had to determine that to go ahead. And then we really asked ourselves the question of whether we wanted to make a documentary or a game. And the answer was,
I was feeling very strongly about I didn't want to make an experience that would preach to the converted. So I saw this as an opportunity to reach skeptical people, reach people that wouldn't go and watch a documentary. For me, I really wanted to make something cute and not threatening, and something that you right away pick up the iPad and be like, yeah, I can play this, and it's going to be entertainment. I'm not going to be fed up with a message, and then, bang, I made you a better person right away, And I really, for me, coming from a commercial industry that's putting out commercial products, I make a lot of emphasis on see how these people are going to get into the experience, how to make that transition as easy, as welcoming as possible. And I thought that social innovation, which is a great subject, could beneficiate from creating a universe that is welcoming, that it's attractive by itself, and then once you're in there, then we can start sort of like opening the curtains and little by little start talking about what's really the message behind.
So what would you say is the best way to create empathy towards a subject like that? Like, what's your take on that?
I mean, my main goal is, I just wanted to reach kids and inspire them to become social innovators themselves. That's my only goal, that's my main goal. And so when Ruben proposed that we go to, that we abandon video, which was really hard for me, because there was video somewhere in there, that, the goal was to have kids to be living in the shoes of an innovator and to feel the journey of an innovator rather than observe what other innovators do. And it seems very simple to explain that now, but it was really, really hard as a filmmaker to let go of that. We're going to document reality and share it, and people can observe it. But rather, we decided to really put people in the innovator's shoes. So
one of the, for me, there was two components that they had to work, which was to have a gameplay that would teach some of the basic actions of an innovator. And if we had that, and then a second part that was to have a narrative structure, a traditional narrative structure with 3 acts that would go through the ups and downs of that journey. For me, I believe that you teach better through emotion than through facts. It's very difficult to teach through facts. People, they'll read it, but they won't absorb it. But emotion, we see it in movies, and we see it in games when it works. It's a powerful tool to teach people something. So I really wanted to use those tools from filmmaking and keep that sort of traditional linear storytelling structure to go through this journey of the social innovator, because when she was telling me the sort of particular stories, real examples of social innovators, they looked exactly like the hero's journey. She was telling me Star Wars over and over again. It was amazing. So it wasn't really that difficult to sort of use that as a tool.
So Philip, is that something you see happen in lots of time when you're going into a project?
Yeah, I think what we have here are examples of two people who are very skilled at their craft, right? They understand the language of what it takes to make excellent product in their field really, really well, and then the translation process has to begin if they are to collaborate. And it's interesting that the thing that it seems like you first found some sort of commonalities when you were talking about both the audience and the subject, right? It wasn't about the medium. It wasn't about how we're going to communicate this idea. It's about who are we telling the story about and who are we telling the story to. And that's a place where we can find a common ground pretty easily. Now, it's important to sort of examine our possible misconceptions of who these people are, but that's a conversation that's pretty natural for most creative folks. It's easy for us to get mired into sort of the technical details about our medium. Like a documentary is a very, very specific version of a film storytelling process, or a quest or an action adventure. It's a very specific form of game. When what we really should be talking about is some of these higher level activities that we're trying to tell with the storytelling and play. Those things, there's elements of all of that in both of your crafts. And once you sort of get to that point where you say, well, what we really want to do is we really want to tell a story, and what we really want to do is give people a chance to play in that, then you can sort of think a little bit more about not what the specific tools in your individual toolkits are, but what does this particular subject and this particular audience need. So you talked about actions and verbs. It's like, what are the things that people can do as social innovators or as players of the game. And that's very, very important because that gives you an idea about what the play in this game is going to be like. And then you also talked about journeys. That's a way to conceive of a story. It's a path that somebody takes through time, and emotion being the central tenet that you wanted to be able to nail with this game. That's what I would suggest. Instead of the process of learning another field shouldn't be guided by learning all the individual specific technical details of that field, but sort of understanding that overall grammar of play or storytelling. And I think what you'll find is that you'll be able to bring a lot of personal experience into the process, and get that conversation just becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, so that's basically what you have to do going into the film of game, but it's a tendency to go into the film of game. So what's being lost, for a filmmaker side point of view, when moving into a game from its subject and its intention as a documentarist to reveal or observe some kind of phenomenon, the reality, and what is the game where you decide to do a game?
Well, I guess you're being there.
Yeah.
So, one thing that you find is that as craftspeople in various media, you're used to different kinds of control over your creative work. Whether there's a certain kind of authorial control in film, is probably a lot of editing. In documentary, sometimes what people say is something out of your control, right? But how you put together the story is something that's very much in your control. Whereas when it comes to making games, what someone's going to actually do in a space can feel out of control because we want to give people the space to make their own decisions. But the verbs that we're giving them are completely under the control of somebody who's making a digital game in particular. Nothing happens in that game world unless the designers explicitly said, we're going to allow this to happen. And so that's one thing that you're going to have to learn. You give up one form of control and gain a different kind of control over your subject. But that's only one way of looking at it, through that lens of how do you control the experience. There's many other ways that we talked about audience, we talked about subject.
And I would be curious to see, what did you lose? Going into this and afterwards to
I have to say, going into games, I gained a lot. More than I lost, but losing my camera was definitely a big thing, a big grief at the beginning, because I couldn't conceive of a project without being on the field and with being with real people and actually talking to them. But then I realized that my objective being, it was a completely willing choice. But I wanted to reach my own kids, and I realized that my own kids consume way more games than they watch television. And the media that really speaks to them is gaming. So I thought, well, I need to learn that language, and I want to express things to them. So I did lose maybe my old tools, but I gained a whole new language to express things that I think they should know about. My kids or your kids, whatever. I gained a lot.
I guess you want me to say that I lost something, but I'm sorry, it's going to be more boring. I gained a lot from working with filmmakers. This wasn't my first experience working with filmmakers. The first one was Spirits of Spring, and that was a constant negotiation of sort of what is necessary to tell a good story, and how do we translate every point to gaming, and what works and we can take it, what has to be changed, what we can do compromise. And for me, this is my rant. As game designers, and especially in most of the schools that teach game design, there's a few exceptions. I think we have a problem as a craft, is that we've told about the form of our art, but not the content so much. And when we get out of school with this sort of context, we strive for getting the game design right, to have a pure and elegant game design. And sometimes we neglect the content and the message and the motion. And this is what filmmakers bring to the table, that they're specialists on that. They've been trained from day one to talk this language of emotions. And I think us, for our art of game making, we need to go back there and have that training. We have a superficial training of the human emotions, how to translate those into our craft. And I think that moving forward, that's a necessity we need to do to move forward our art.
It was interesting because during the whole process, I had filmic biases, like bring the camera closer to characters. I want to see their faces. I want to see their emotion. Or we could write this into the dialogue. So I kept wanting to write things, to say things, and then learning from the games that you can express emotions through the whole environment, and several tools that the game can provide. You don't need to be close to the face of the character, perhaps, to feel that emotion. You can feel it because you're walking. You can feel it in your body. So, it's really rewiring your own biases as a filmmaker to abandon this sort of language of being close for intense moments, being far for perspective. It all gets rewritten in a different language.
So what would be your advice to a group of people? Well,
your
advice. No, your advice to like a filmmaker wanting to.
Now I want to write a small book on filmmakers wanting to make games. It was funny because there's small things and big things that I noted, but the first thing is, if you're a filmmaker and you want to make a game, don't try to say everything, just use the damn mechanics, would be my main recommendation. The second one, and it's a bit shocking when you come from film, is that it's not your game. It might have been your films, but making a game is your director's role is really different, and it's much more collaborative, and it's more about managing people than really in film what it is. You'll be working with 7 directors of photography or 7 editors or whatever. Everybody has ownership in the game, and they have a very strong artistic role, so you're not dealing with 2 key or 3 key people. Everybody owns the game, and that's wonderful, but it's also challenging sometimes. One difficult thing was that you'll have to write using Excel, and that's not poetic, because I had a small fit. When I learned that I had to write my script in Excel, I thought that was, eventually, because, eventually everything becomes code, so that means it has to be a line and it has to be attached to a code, and I found that so unromantic somehow. I couldn't write it. And that basically, when you make a film, it's a relay run. So you run a little bit and you pass the stick to a camera person or a sound person and an editor, and you run one after the other. And a game is really a team sprint where everybody leaves at the same time and runs, and you better not fall behind because everybody's running with you. So these are small differences, but they have a big impact when you're making your first game, and probably your second.
Yeah, talking of second. So what would be your advice?
My advice would be to do that exercise of negotiation at the beginning of the project, and sort of like go back to the basics, discuss the definition of words that we assume we know their meaning. Also, with my belief that teaching emotion is a great way to teach anything, find in your game design where you can have your story, where you can have that story that's going to help you bring out the emotions. And finally, this is like the most maybe practical advice is like when somebody from film comes into a game production, they've never been in that process of game production. They've never seen those pipelines. So for them, it's very difficult to take that leap of faith that you need to take, because games come together very late in the process. Like, we don't have audio pretty much until the very month of the game, and audio can be 50% of your experience. So you constantly have to remind them that everything is going to be all right. Just hold my hand, we're gonna get there, and it's a constant process of reminding them that, because it's very, very late in the process that happens. And there is another component on playtesting that it's so different, the experience that you have as a creator making a game and that other person from outside coming and playing that game, that it's something that you have to get used to it, and I don't think there's an equivalent to filmmaking.
Yes, and maybe Philip, do you see that from other fields? Like we have a filmmaker and a game designer, but like that at the MIT work with other people, so.
Well, my tip is to remember that game development is an iterative process, and we've already had a number of talks that have stressed this point, and that I think sort of illustrates what these class people had to educate on each other on. The fact that you can't really see where the game is going until you're actually pretty far into the process. I would say my big tip is, yes, you're going to have to learn new tools. You're going to have to give up the camera, but you get a digital camera, and you have to learn things like spreadsheets, game engines, and so forth. You're going to have to learn that, but don't get mired in that. Don't let that be all of the education process, because that's really not the most important thing. That's just the tools. The fact that you have common ground regarding your audience, regarding your subject, and getting that negotiation process out of the way early. And I feel that maybe documentary filmmakers have an advantage, that they're used to taking unexpected things, things that the camera accidentally caught or unanticipated footage, and doing something with that, right? And game development's all that. It's like you make something, it doesn't quite come out the way that you expected, but you can see the gold in there, and you can sort of polish it in the direction that serves the audience and the emotion and the subject. So you have to remain flexible. That's what I'm going to, that's my big tip. And keep your eyes open for opportunities throughout the entire development process.
All right, thank you for that, guys. We're pretty short on time, I guess, so if you have any questions, we would be, well, we can answer, of course. Is there any question? Yep.
Did everybody hear the question? How long did it take to develop, and did it slow down the process? We've been working together for 1 year. I did 6 months of documentary research on the real people that inspired the game. I mean, we kept that documentary research. That's what we used as a material to create the game. But I don't think it slowed it down. 1 year to make a game is not really long. I mean, we've been in production for 3 months only. It's a small game.
We did a long pre-production, which helped a lot. It was very important to have a long pre-production, especially for that not to slow down things later. There was a lot of discussions back and forth, but we did that before. So when we went to production, things were smooth.
And just the game will be out in September, but basically the potato world is a world where potatoes represent money, and so you start playing the game and you can buy or get everything with potatoes, and then suddenly potatoes disappear, and that's when you have to innovate. So that's basically what we came up with as a game mechanic. Voilà.
notes you have on like the future of the game, what you're going to do with it afterwards. You've had a year to work together. Do you plan the future out like that?
Well, it's going to be launched as a game. I mean, the National Film Board has experience launching interactive projects and films, but this time is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to work closely to know how to launch a game, because we're not very good at that yet.
And that's the way we work most of the time. We go into interactive and we just look at, of course we have resources at the NFB, but with all the development into media, like marketing a game and bringing a game to its public is not exactly the same thing as marketing an interactive piece and a film. So this is one other reason, because those guys have also that experience, and this is how we cherry pick like people to help us like go through and of course learn through that process and bring it back to other kinds of marketing strategy and stuff like that.
All right, so thank you. Thanks to you. Have a good day.